I am a clinical psychologist by education. So my PhD, I am a shrink. In the very first chapter, I talk, the name of the chapter is Money's Much More Than a Number. When we talk about the traditional trappings of money, power, success, like this man, only Genghis Khan did it better than Alexander the Great in sort of the traditional concept of wealth. One of the reasons that people get so locked in on money is because it's easy to measure. It's easy to quantify. It's easy to stack it, count it, see how it goes up.
There's a difference between a dream chaser and a dream catcher. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Dream Catchers podcast. I'm your host, Jerome, and I know that I say you're in for a treat a lot when I intro the podcast, but today we've got a world leading expert, and not just because I say so, but he's studied internationally. His work is recognized internationally. And I haven't found anybody that's gone deeper on this subject other than maybe the people that we are going to talk about who have their doctorate degrees in specific areas, but not actually intertwining and bringing everything together in one body of knowledge. And so it's my honor to have Dr. Daniel Crosby in with me today on the show. How are you, man?
Jerome, good to be with you, man.
It's an honor to have you. I know people probably reach out to you more than you care for to have you come on and share your wisdom and all of the research that you've done. And I was fortunate enough that you were willing to pick me. So I want to get into it, man. Let's talk a little bit about your background. Like, what is your true expertise? Like, you're the best in the world at what?
So you gotta start at the beginning. I am a clinical psychologist by education. So my PhD, I am a shrink, like by education. And even though I've spent the last 15 years on Wall Street, effectively, I still really identify with being a clinical psychologist first and foremost, because money touches every part of our lives, and it's impossible to disentangle our financial lives from our personal lives. So I actually went into this world to try and specialize in eating disorder treatment, but sort of found my way to this world of behavioral finance. So if I had to talk about what I'm the best in the world at, it would be sort of the practical application of behavioral finance, talking about money, mindset, and meaning.
Money, mindset, and meaning, the three M's. And so this for me is super interesting because when we talk about people making money, they think when they exit their business that that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow will solve and fix everything. Do you find that to be true?
Well, I find that people think that, and then I find that they're sorely disappointed, right? You and I talked before we hit record a little bit about the positive psychology literature, and in my book, The Soul of Wealth, in the very first chapter, I talk. The name of the chapter is Money's Much More Than a Number, and I give the example of Alexander the Great. Okay, Alexander the Great is the second richest person to ever live. We're talking about a man who's 10 times richer than the richest person alive today, which is just staggering. One of the most powerful people to ever live. The dude starts waging war when he's 20 years old. He goes more than a decade before he loses a battle. And so when we talk about the traditional trappings of money, power, success, like this man, only Genghis Khan did it better than Alexander the Great in sort of the traditional concept of wealth. But in the book, I talk about his downfall. He loses his best friend, right? He loses his best friend who was one of his lieutenants in the siege of Tyre. And when his best friend dies, he's completely wrecked. He's completely undone, and his whole life starts to fall apart. And so I use him as an example for all of us and the kind of people that listen to your show who may have had a tremendous exit, right? Who may have achieved otherworldly levels of wealth, but then go on to find that there's more. There is a great deal more. And I think a lot of times we fixate on that number, but then when we get there, we find out it's not all that maybe we thought it was.
So what is the more? If it's not money, because people who say, well, more money, right? I can get a Timex, and then maybe I can get a Movado, and then I can get a Tag Heuer, and then I can get a Hublot, and I can get a Rolex, and I can get an AP, and I can get a Richard Mille. I could just keep getting more, right? More expensive doesn't mean it's more valuable. It just costs more. So, like, what is the more that is more meaningful than the money?
First of all, putting Richard Mill over AP is just,
I'm just
no.
talking about what it costs, man.
I know,
I'm
I
just
know,
talking about what
I
it
know.
costs.
I'm just a royal oak. Like one day I would like a royal oak, right? That would make me happy. No. So one of the reasons that people get so locked in on money is because it's easy to measure, right? It's easy to quantify, it's easy to stack it, count it, see how it goes up. And in a previous work I did, I dug into the neuroeconomics literature that found that we value money independent of what it can buy for us, which is a really irrational thing. Like we treat it like liquid happiness. We value it. We value this idea of like number go up independent of any utility, which is a really strange thing. And yet it's not all that we think it is. So if we're going to replace this idea of sort of money as its own, money for money's sake, which is how we're kind of wired, we need a way to measure the good parts of life. And in the book, I draw on Martin Seligman's literature, his incredible work around human flourishing. And he has something called the PERMA model. And he talks about these 5 facets of meaning. And real quick, we can go into them as deep as you want, but real quick, the PERMA, the P is for positive experiences, right? This is just fun, hedonic pleasure, going to a ball game, eating an ice cream cone, holding your partner's hand, whatever, like having fun. The E is for engagement, which is deep work. The R is for relationships. This is the number one thing. This is the number one thing that sort of speaks to human flourishing is relationships. The M is for meaning, working for something bigger than yourself, God, spirituality, philanthropy, teamwork, whatever that is. And then A is for advancement. We are wired for growth. We want to be better today than we were yesterday. And when you think about that person who sold their business, running a business has a lot of that baked in. It's got advancement, it's got teamwork, it's got relationships, it's got deep, meaningful work. It's even got some elements of fun. And so when we sell that business, we're leaving all that richness behind and we're basically trading it all for the P, right? We trade it all for the P. Now we got a lot of money. We can have all these positive emotions, right? We can buy a beach house. We can buy a lot of ice cream and a lot of tickets to ball games. But we may be missing the relationships, the work, the meaning, the growth, and we fail to recognize how big that stuff is.
And so that is the identity I would try to reduce it down to. Would you agree with that, or you think that's too much of a simplification?
Well, I mean, it's hard to simplify life, but I think we need a simplification. Like one of the reasons I think the PERMA model is so good is it allows us to sort of look at how balanced our life is and say, hey, like just simple back of the napkin, like 1 to 10, am I having fun? Like 1 to 10, am I working hard? 1 to 10, am I giving love and receiving love? 1 to 10, am I working for something bigger than myself? 1 to 10, am I growing? Right? Like it's reductionistic, yes. It's like oversimplified, yes. But you got to, like, you got to. That's one of the ways that we got to get away from this sort of chasing after dollars for dollars' sake.
So you, I've never heard anybody say it's like liquid. I can't remember it.
Liquid
You were just
happiness.
liquid happiness. Money is liquid happiness. And this thought of more is going to make you happier. Now, what's do you know what happened when we decoupled the happiness from the number going up or the utility of it? Like why, some people say, well, a billion is too much or being having 200 billion is too much. You can't ever actually use it all. You have to spend $1 million an hour or $1 million a day to spend it one day, or it'll take you 400 years to do it. I've seen some crazy calculations on social media. But why? Let me simplify the question. Do you know when the separation between money and its utility happened?
Well, so here's we got to go to in the Wayback Machine, right? Like, so we got to think about how we're wired. Our brains have not had an upgrade in, depending who you ask, 150 to 200,000 years, okay? So we are wired with the same physiological wiring as our ancestors who were just trying to, like, make eke it out on the savannah, right? And so if you think about the timeline of human history, again, people disagree about how long it is, right? But if you look at the timeline of human history, something like the pyramids in Egypt, if we made all of human history 1 year, the pyramids would have been built on Christmas Day, give or take, right? So the pyramids, which we think of being so ancient, like we're sitting here on December 31st today, right? The pyramids were built on December 25th. So for most of human history, people have been hungry, cold, tired, and have just been squeaking by, right? Even if you look back to when the US was founded, 85% of the world was living on today what would be $2 or less a day. 85% of the world. Today, that number is 9%, right? So a thriving middle class is a recent phenomenon. 2,000 calories a day for most people in the world is a recent phenomenon. And so for most of human history, we have been wired for more, 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 more. And if you think back about it, you needed that because you kill the animal, you eat it, and like it's time to go again. Like you gather the berries, you eat them, it's time to go again. There was not this ability to hoard wealth and to store wealth in a portable way that would see you through in your lifetime. Now, there are a great many of us who have or will shortly have enough wealth that we never have to work again. And that for middle class and for upper middle class people to be able to set aside enough wealth to go for decades without striving for more is a brand new phenomenon. Like that is brand new. And it is now the backbone of retirement. I mean, just for any old firefighter, school teacher, nurse, doctor, whatever, the expectation is you're going to accrue enough wealth to live for 30 years without working. That is brand new. Like that, our ability to do that is brand new. So we are up against a biology and a physiology and a psychology that tells us go, 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 more, 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 keep striving, keep stacking chips, keep striving, keep putting it away. And we tend to be stuck in that on position, even for those of us who don't really need that anymore.
And so we're fighting biology if we say, I have enough. Where is that? Is there a process for that? Is that even desirable? Is the more the way that we've been wired? Is that the way we should be?
Well, I think you can want more, but you need to want the right more. Because like chasing after money as your more, like when you've got enough, right? So for people who aren't at the financial finish line yet, sure, go get more, right? Because money does, we can talk about that research. Money does buy some happiness up to a point, and it does solve some problems for sure. But for people, for a lot of the people that you're talking to, people who have had really extraordinary exits, trying to chase more money is like trying to overcome your thirst by drinking salt water, right? Like it's never going to happen, right? You're just going to get thirstier and thirstier and thirstier. The Because again, we value it for its own sake. If 2 billion's good, 3 billion's better, like regardless of what it can, what it can do for us. And so you go back to that PERMA model, like by all means, chase deeper relationships, like chase a closer relationship to a higher power, like chase being a better human, chase being a better guitarist, right? Like these sorts of things can slake your thirst better than just more money, more money, more money, which doesn't have the power to sate us or to satisfy us.
So if I bring Arthur Brooks in, he basically talks about happiness being your wants over the wants you have over the wants that you don't have. And if the key to happiness or more happiness is wanting less, which is a very Eastern concept, right? The whole Buddhist and not having expectation. I I've struggled with that concept because I don't think that we're put here to shrink or to not desire. I think many times when it's put in our heart is so that there's benefit, there's a greater good, there's a need for creation, which is going to benefit others in order for us to achieve or accomplish that outcome that we are seeking. But happiness and this thirst or this desire that we're talking about, this desire for more, I think those are two separate concepts. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I would put it, I mean, Arthur Brooks is fantastic. I think I would put it a little differently. I think sometimes it's wanting different, not wanting less or shrinking, but wanting different. I have a boss, or my former boss, sold his business for hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And he's a little older than me, so clearly he's set, right? Like he's fine. Um, I imagine he'll start another business soon, but not because he needs more money or even wants more money. He literally just loves the game that much. He loves building a team and he's philanthropically minded. So for him, I don't think there's anything wrong with pushing because he's doing it because he takes value in employing people. He sees value in building a team and building relationships. He's a deeply intellectual, high-minded guy, and he wants an outlet for that intellect. And he's deeply charitable, and he wants to give more money away. Like that, to me, is a perfectly soulful and joyful reason for a guy with all the money he ever needs to start another business and do it. Now, for some people, though, I know other founders who have sold and made equivalent sums and have had sort of a pathological push to start something because they feel inadequate or they feel not as rich as the next guy or they want a bigger exit. And it's driven by pathology and not abundance. So I think that is qualitatively a different thing. And it from the outside looking in, it doesn't always look all that different, right? Founder A and founder B are both on to the next one. But I think is it that lack and that pathology and that devil on your shoulder that's pushing you? Or is it a desire to bless the world and a desire to just, engage those innate gifts? And I think I've seen both.
My struggle, so like our framework, we've got 8 exits. Exit 6 is the liquidity event that we talk about where people 7, 8, 9 figure exits. The backside of that, we see a portfolio usually created because you sold the business that was your cash flow to get a lump sum, and then usually you redeploy that lump sum to into businesses that give you cash flow again. Um, Exit 8 for us is some type of philanthropic endeavor, one where you're endowing it so that it continues on past you, so that you don't really have to worry about the going out and getting grants. Because I think that's every foundation's It's the bane of their existence of I've got to figure out how to get people to give us money instead of just being able to do the mission. My struggle when people exit and then they go say, "Hey, I'm going to build another business," is you've you've got your time freedom. You're able to buy your freedom, and then to then bind that renewable resource back up in figuring out how to make money for the sake of making money um, is is a challenge for me because I feel like you've solved that lower order problem. Like if we bring in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first two levels are related to money, right? Like you can buy your way out of the first two levels, but three through five, and then even transcendence above self actualization is not something that you can buy. And so is I, I don't know this is a fair question to ask you, but I'll ask you anyway. Is going back and building another business truly the best use of an exited founder's capabilities?
I think it oftentimes is, because if you look at those higher levels, yes, the first two bases of the pyramid are met like in perpetuity, right? But if you look up that, you're looking at relationships, love, growth, self-actualization. I don't see any reason why those things can't occur in the context of a startup or a business. I also think that, founders who aren't philanthropic are really missing out, right? So on the one hand, I one of the chapters in my new book is called, generosity is the path to abundance. And one of the things that I loved about this is that I went back. I wanted this book to be evergreen. Like I wanted, my kids 50 years from now are reading this book. I want it to still hit. And if you look in the Tao Te Ching, the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, on and on and on, every sort of faith tradition and wisdom tradition has some version of this idea that by giving money away, you are increased. Like, right? Like by being charitable, you are made richer. And when you look at the psychological literature on this, you see that the two biggest predictors of financial contentment are one, and it's like 1A and 1B, they're tied, right? So like 1A is how much money do you have, of course, right? Because that's like how wealthy do you feel, how much money do you have? And 1B is how much money do you give away? So if you look at a bell curve, you've got people that are in the 99th percentile for money in the bank who don't feel wealthy, and you've got people at the 30th percentile of money in the bank who do, because some of them are being charitable and some of them are not. So I absolutely agree that any founder who's had a big exit and is not taking very specific measures to give back is missing out on an incredible opportunity. That said, I don't know that every founder's highest and best use is as the head of a foundation, right? Like I think sometimes their effort is better utilized. I think there's someone better to do that job, and they can go, do more good in the world to solve more problems to fund that foundation.
Yeah. And I don't actually think that head of the foundation is their role. I think their influence and their resources is something that will make the foundation more successful because they can garner and attract. And so I think there's probably some chairman role or some board role
Mhm.
where they fit in pretty well. But I watch so many people just turn around and it's like, I've got to start a new thing and I've got to figure out how to make that thing as profitable as possible so that we can scale it. And if I exit it for 50 million this time, I need to exit for 100 million because, I did eight, so I might as well do nine. And it's back to this money for money's sake. To me, it goes back to hoarding. And I just don't believe that that's the North Star for most people. I think there's the more that we talked about kind of earlier on in this conversation, that more and fulfilling that more and maybe eradicating a problem or creating opportunity is the magic.
Yeah. So I agree with you that many and probably even most founders who have a big exit and go right on to that next thing that has to be bigger and badder than the one before, I think most of the time that's driven by that pathology or that scarcity that we talked about. And I think that that is off. Like I agree with you that that's off. But I do think there is a small subset of people for whom they really, that is just their gift, that is their talent, they're solving problems, they're doing it the right way.
Hey guys, as you might know, a very small percentage of the people who actually listen to this podcast are subscribers. So do us a favor, subscribe. In fact, we did some analytics and we found out that only 25% of the people who listen are subscribers. And our goal is to get that to about 75% over the next 3 months. So do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you get notified when our new episodes come. We plan to bring immense value to you guys going forward as we continue to improve the content that we create at Dreamcatcher. Your dreams should be real. Let's get back to the show.
They're doing it in a way that doesn't keep them away from their family all the time. They're doing it in a way that blesses other people's lives. They're doing it in a way that's less about, number go up or it's got to be bigger this time and more about like solving a real problem. And it's like, that's kind of a fine line to walk. And I think it requires you to be really honest with yourself, which is hard to do. But I think those people exist.
I do. The honest reflection and the intentional action is, I think, the difference maker for those who don't actually spend the time in reflection. And it's just, hey, I'm wired to chase, throw the ball, I'm gonna go catch the ball. They're operating at a lower order. Earlier, you mentioned something, and we didn't go down the path, and I'd like to go down the path now. You talked about money being able to buy happiness, a certain amount of it. What's the research say related to that? Because I saw some stuff a long time ago, and I don't think that's accurate anymore.
Yeah. So, excuse me, maybe the thing that you saw a couple years back, there was a really popular study that came out, and it was done by a Nobel Prize winning researcher and his partner, and they found that at from $0 to $75,000 a year, money's like up and to the right, okay, but then at about $75,000 a year, which is 100 today, sort of adjusted for inflation, that it plateaus. So the way that they were measuring that is they would give people pagers like beepers, and they would beep them at random intervals throughout the day, and basically, 1 to 10, how are you feeling? Okay. So if you think about that, it sort of starts to make sense because there's no blood test for happiness, right? It's happiness is sort of a subjective measure. And what we know from that research is that money buys you the absence of misery. So if you make, $100,000 or better, your kids go to a safe school, you eat healthy fruits and vegetables, you eat, your stomach's full, your kids go to a safe school, you don't hear gunshots at night, you sleep in a warm bed, you have health insurance, you can fix the roof when it leaks. So basically what they found was that money doesn't necessarily buy you happiness, but it does buy you the absence of misery. There's another study that measured happiness a different way. It measured it qualitatively, that just said basically like, hey, I'm going to give you a sheet of paper. You write down subjectively, qualitatively, Jerome, how you doing, right? And in this one, they found that money did buy happiness. And in fact, for about a third of people, it accelerated over that $100,000 mark, because that was kind of the point at which you get those bottom two rungs of Maslow's hierarchy knocked out. And now you can worry about the bigger stuff. Gandhi, I'm paraphrasing, but Gandhi has this quote that, to a poor man, bread is God. If you're worried about where your next meal is coming from, you don't have time to worry about God or friendship or love or self-actualization. You're just trying to fill the stomach. So yeah, for some people, it sort of shoots up past $100,000. Now, this is one of the most interesting to me. For 15% of people, there is no relationship between happiness and money at any level. And these people are just grumpy. So like we've all met people who are just kind of stuck and just kind of miserable. And maybe it's nature, maybe it's nurture, maybe it's, who knows. But for if you find yourself in that 15% of people who are just kind of always sad, money is not the thing you need. You need companionship, you need therapy, you need medication, you need something, but it's not money, right? So it's very complicated. Money can buy us some subjective happiness. It can definitely buy us the absence of misery, unless you're one of these people who's sort of perpetually miserable, and then it doesn't help. And then there's also, I'll shut up, but there's a whole thing on how you spend money matters a lot too for your happiness.
Well, don't shut up because I mean that's a logical next place to go. I want to go there, but I also want to answer this question. And is happiness the default setting? So am I happy unless there's things that are making me miserable? Or and so if I can eliminate that, then I'm happy? Or is it the other way around?
So here, let me start to answer that question. So when we look at the happiness equation, it's really kind of an interesting thing, and it's definitely not what people think. Okay, so 50% of our happiness is down to genetics, and people really hate to hear that, because people have a happiness set point the same way that people have a set point for something like weight. Like you can influence your weight, of course, through diet and exercise. You can influence your weight, but some people are sort of naturally bigger or smaller than others, right? We understand that diet and exercise matter, but there is also such thing as a set point for weight, and different people carrying weight in different ways. 40% of happiness is volitional. So 40% of happiness is sort of down to our choices we make. And only 10% of happiness is due to our circumstances. People really, really overweight circumstances, right? People really, really overweight circumstances. They think that they will be as happy or as sad as the things that life hands them. But it's kind of a good news, bad news thing. The bad news is your mom and dad may have given you really rotten genetics, and that's hard to overcome. But the good news is, of the remaining 50%, most of it is up to you, and very little of it is what happens to you. And there's even fascinating research that shows that, they compared groups of people who won the lottery versus people who were in like a bad car crash, and in many cases became paraplegic or quadriplegic. And so there's an initial, the lottery winners see an initial spike in happiness, the accident victims see an initial decrease, but 1 year later, wherever you go, there you are, and those two people are kind of back where they started, because it really has a great deal more to do with genetics and choices than it does with sort of life circumstances.
And I guess there's a hedonic adaptation to it as well, right? So this is life. I'm accepting this is life, and um, the bad isn't so bad. And ooh, that quote of everything happens for you, nothing happens to you, and moving from victim to having the thought that you're in control or you can influence it, I think is important to just kind of put all that together.
So hedonic adaptation is a great concept. It's a big phrase for people who don't know it, but hedonic adaptation is just our human tendency to adjust to whatever circumstance we're in. And we talked about hedonic adaptation. They sometimes call it the hedonic treadmill, because it's like you're running and running and you're not going anywhere. So people can get used to good times and bad times. So when we talked about money not being enough for that billionaire, right, who's got $1 billion, they buy a 20,000 square foot house, and soon that house just becomes where you throw your dirty socks. Like the house is just your house, and so you can get used to something really extravagant and really grand. People can also get used to really hard stuff. People think, oh, if I ever lost so and so, or if I ever, was in a bad wreck, or if I ever, lost this capability, that would be it for me. I couldn't survive. And people are a lot more capable of handling bad times than they realize, but they're also a lot more capable of getting used to wealth and abundance and luxury than they realize. And it sort of cuts both ways.
So the good is only good for so long, the bad is only bad for so long. It
Mm-hmm.
comes to acceptance and then what you do with it and the meaning that you assign to the happenings. I love that. One of my favorite two-word sentences is I choose.
Mm.
And that agency, I think, is the magic of our us being, I'll call it in control, although I don't know that we control a whole lot, in control of our experience, our circumstance, the outcomes. You were telling me you were going to shut up. There was another path that you were going to go down before I threw this in. Can we go down that other path? I don't want to lose that.
No, no, we can definitely. Viktor Frankl is sort of my professional hero, Austrian psychiatrist, Holocaust survivor. I'm going to mess up his quote, but it is like that. I choose. He says, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our growth and freedom, right? Like between what happens to you and what you think about it or what you do about it, I choose, and whatever you choose is a powerful predictor of where you go next. So I was going to talk about the spending literature, happiness and spending money. There's a couple of ways that we can reliably buy happiness with spending money. Okay, one of them we kind of touched on, giving it away. Giving away money, being charitable, being generous with our money buys us dramatically more happiness than spending it on ourselves. And almost no one believes that. Like if you ask people, would you here's $500, are you going to be happier if you buy yourself something or you buy a gift for someone else? People overwhelmingly think that buying themselves something is going to make them happier, and they're wrong. So giving money away is huge. Getting out of work you hate is another one, right? Like, okay, Jerome, what's something you hate to do?
Going to Lowe's.
Going to Lowe's. So hitting the Instacart and having somebody bring you back the boards or whatever, the nails and the boards or whatever you need from Lowe's, that's going to save you a lot of grief, right? And that's a good thing. For me, we both live in the South. I am never going to cut my yard ever again, knock on wood. When I see that high school kid out sweating in my yard in the August in Atlanta, that makes me real happy, to have gotten out of that work that I hate. So it's a form of buying back time and avoiding pain, right? So buying back that time, buying back that freedom, avoiding the pain. Another one is on activities that foster relationships. My favorite example here is cars. So if you buy a car because you want to flex on your neighbor, okay? Because you want to stun on your neighbor and show them how great you are and how good you're doing. That doesn't buy much happiness for very long, okay? For a week or two, the neighbor thinks it's cool, your wife hugs you a little tighter or whatever. But then pretty quickly you become hedonic adaptation, you become habituated to it, it's no big deal anymore. If you buy a car to join the Ferrari Club of Atlanta, that buys a great deal of happiness because now you bought yourself some buddies. You bought yourself something to do on a Saturday morning. You can go down and drink your coffee and pop the hood and compare engines and talk with I don't know anything about cars, right? But you can talk with your buddies about cars. That is shown to buy a great deal of happiness. So, be thoughtful, like same purchase. Sometimes buying a fancy car helps, sometimes it doesn't, and the motive matters, right? The last one I'll talk about is novelty. We've talked about habituation and adaptation and how we can kind of get bored. When we buy ourselves novelty, that helps a lot. If I really want to go to Japan, I'm going to go to Japan in April. And so when I go to Japan, new food, new people, new sights, new smells, new experiences, cool toilets, all this stuff is stuff I've never seen before. And that sticks with you. And when you get back, humans engage in this thing called rosy retrospection, where when we reflect back on an experience, it gets better and better. It's like a fish story. It gets built up better and better and better in our minds. Whereas the car, like the car we buy, the thing we buy, the AP Royal Oak we buy gets scratched up, right? Like the watch we buy gets scratched, the car gets dinged, the memory gets better. So buying yourself memories and buying yourself novelty gets better with time, and it ages in a way that material things don't.
Is that because we're making it better? Because I think we recreate memories. Like we're making up our memory, we're rewriting our memory. Are we writing it better each time? And is that why you got to take the pictures and all the stuff when you go do the thing?
Yeah, so you just spoke some real truth there. A lot of people think that when we remember something, it's like we open a file drawer in our brains and we pull out the file and sort of experience it as it is. That is not true. You are recreating that memory effectively from scratch every time. And so humankind is wired to self-justify, right? And that actually gets us in a lot of trouble, right? Because if me and you are in Atlanta traffic and I cut you off, you think that guy's an asshole. And I think like, oh, I just haven't had my coffee yet. You know what I mean? I would make excuses, right? You attribute it to something internal in me. I attribute it to something else. So we self-justify in ways that are good and bad. But like if, I take my kids to Disney every summer, and if you texted me while I'm in a 2-hour line for the Magic Kingdom and you said, "Hey, how you doing?" I'd be like, "Not great, bro."
Not the happiest place on earth for
No,
me.
I just paid $8 for water. Like I'm sunburned, like this isn't great. But then if you get back from that trip and you're talking with your kids, you go, "Oh, wasn't Disney good? Like, wasn't Disney fun? Wasn't that magical?" Like in the moment, it's a pain. Same thing, like 14-hour flight to Japan, that's miserable. Like in the moment, you're like, this is not great. But then when you're coming back and you're remembering it, you're self-justifying. You're like, well, I'm sure glad I did that. Like, wasn't it cool that I got to see all this stuff? So our retrieval process is far from objective. We're building that story from scratch. And when we buy ourselves novelty, when we buy ourselves time with people we love, we tend to build that up in newer and better ways with time.
Man, I could talk to you forever. Let me offer this one perspective and let me see what you do with it. So, many people, when they exit, they don't feel like they can talk to others because they don't feel like they'll get it. And many people will also offer to them, "Hey, you've got enough money, you'll figure it out," because they don't know what to do. They sold all of that meaning and stuff from the PERMA model in order to put money in the bank account, whether it's through a check or a wire. This concept, this notion that you've got enough money, you'll figure it out. Do you think that them having the money and them figuring it out are conjoined? Like, do you think that's an indicator of them being able to figure it out?
So, I write in the book, I'm gonna look it up. I think I can find it real quick. I write about half truths. And there we go. A belief that money is a tool that solves every problem is so hard to shake because it is riddled with half truths. Money can't buy us happiness outright, but it can buy us the absence of misery. Money can't buy us love, but it can buy us chocolate and roses. Money can't buy us purpose, but it can buy us time to reflect on the meaning of life. So money can move you in that direction, right? Money can move you in that direction, but if you believe that money in and of itself is gonna be the thing, then no. So money is a lubricant, right? Like money will facilitate that process, but it's never gonna help you cross the finish line. And, again, I talked about this growing middle class, and like we are living in the most abundant society that has ever been, like on the earth, right? And yet we also see staggering levels of mental illness and disconnection and loneliness. And so the belief that money is this thing that's going to solve every problem, it's a half truth. But if people are smart about how to use their money, it can facilitate, but it's never going to be the silver bullet. And people that think that don't understand. And for the average person who's grinding it out in a cubicle, right? Like this is going to feel very disconnected. They're going to say, well, if I had whatever millions of dollars, I'd be all good. This is why I think, wealthy people, there's this idea in psychology of a wounded healer, right? Like people who have been through an addiction, an eating disorder, substance use, or whatever, are more skilled at helping other people with the same problem, right? Me and my wife had a bunch of miscarriages, right? We have a great family now, but for a while there, we were having a lot of trouble. And when I used to have a friend who would have a miscarriage, I would, in a sincere way, kind of pat them on the back and say, hey, I'm really sorry. And I mean, I was sorry, right? Like, I'm really sorry this happened to you. Now, when I have a friend who has a miscarriage, like, casseroles, comfort, prayers, engagement, like, you know what I mean? Like it's a different level. So I think it's why we need groups of founders talking to founders and people who've been there talking to people who have been there, because it's only once you've experienced that appeal is going to be deeply unsympathetic to the average person grinding it out at a 9 to 5.
So I think some people will struggle with the thought that you have to experience it in order to understand it. I hear this. I used to do work with a guy who was working with veterans who were suffering from complicated grief and post-traumatic stress syndrome. And they didn't want to go talk to a counselor or a therapist because they felt like they couldn't understand them. Do you feel like somebody has to actually go through the thing to understand or have the empathy or hold the space for the person to explore their experience?
I think it helps, because I think you could tell me what it's like to be a black man in America, and I could listen and really want to understand that. But there would always be a divide, right? There would always be some level at which I didn't understand that. The same is true of, I think, any life experience and the experiences we're talking about. That's not to say that no one who's been there can help you. I think if you get someone who's deeply empathetic and wants to understand that, they can get, a lot of the way there. But I do think that there is something about having been there, done that gives potentially a level of empathy that's hard to recreate otherwise.
Love it. Love it. I think that lived experience is probably worth a lot more than study and book work. So let's talk about the book, man, because I just ordered my copy while we were on. I should have ordered it before we got here, but I just ordered my hard copy while we were on, and I'm gonna get the Audible as well because that extra effort is really valuable for me because I spend a lot of time in the car. Why'd you write the book, and who's it for?
So I wrote the book. It's my fourth book, and my first three books were all about sort of the blocking and tackling of money. How do you pick a stock? How do you create a financial plan? How do you stay out of your own way en route to amassing, a good level of wealth? And that's important, right? I'm not taking anything away from that. But what I found was because of the work that I do, I run into a lot of people who have a lot of money, like a lot of money. And I've found that so many of them, from the outside looking in, everyone would suppose that they were just blissfully happy. And then you get led into their lives and you find that that just wasn't the case. So at the micro level, it was just this, meeting a lot of rich people, meeting a lot of like shockingly rich people who weren't happy. And then at the macro level is just watching what's going on in the country, right? I mean, just watching what's going on in the country where we're the wealthiest nation the world has ever seen, right? In terms of a widespread abundance in the US in this 21st century. And yet, again, suicides on the rise, despair, loneliness, all these things. We've got these bottom two rungs of Maslow's hierarchy knocked out, and yet we can't seem to figure out, we just seem to have inherited a new class of problems. And so, both at the micro and the macro level, it was impactful to me. And it's the first book I've ever written that's for everyone. All of my previous books are for financial professional use. I mean, they would be over the head of the average reader. And this is the first book that I've ever written that was for everyone. And I'm super proud of the fact that, mom and pop folks can read it and get it.
And what will they get as a result of reading the book?
So the book is practical life advice on money and meaning, like how to take the abundance you've worked for and apply it in a way that makes your life better. How to make, money a servant and not a master in your life.
I love it. I love it. Oh man. And so is it Amazon? Is it a website? Where's the best place for them to go to get it?
Amazon's just the easiest way. Like, I mean, there's Barnes and Noble, Amazon, my publisher, but honestly, for most folks, Amazon, the name of the book is The Soul of Wealth. And, the Audible is great too, but Amazon, The Soul of Wealth.
Got it. Okay. So the way I love to wrap these episodes up is asking what I feel is a capstone question. And we can go back into something that we've already talked about, or you can introduce something new. But the question is, what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from this episode?
The idea I'd introduce here is that it's all about purpose. There's a couple of chapters in the book that talk about tying money to purpose, and the results are just staggering. Like when you tie your money to your why, the results are almost like science fiction. Like people make better decisions, they're less likely to panic sell, they're more likely to save. Like we move around in a world where we treat money, again, like an end unto itself. We treat our accounts like a video game or something, and we've just sort of divorced money from life. And I think that process of remarrying your money with your meaning is such a great good. And I hope people will check that out in the book and run with that idea a little bit.
Man, I can't wait to dig into it. Daniel, this has been amazing, man. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and doing the work that you're doing. It's very easy for me to see that you're on purpose and in purpose, and that's the epitome of what a dream catcher is. And so I thank you for all that you have done and will continue to do.
Jerome, I'm very glad our paths crossed. Thank you.
All right, to the listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you all in the next episode.